the OBA right here on Mix 1080 AM WUFO, talking about the world of sports on a spring-like day in Buffalo. Not quite, but we're getting there. All right, 837-1112, we have a lot to talk about. NCAAs are going on as we speak. Congratulations to the UB Bulls on an outstanding job of making it to the NCAA tournament. That is an accomplishment within itself, and hopefully it will see a new age in college basketball in Western New York. 837-1112, 837-1112. I have a special guest with me in studio today. He is not a stranger to our show here, the #1 sports show in the nation here on Mix 1080 AM WFO Radio. He's my good friend. He is the partner for the private investment proposal to build a state-of-the-art stadium entertainment complex here on the waterfront on the vacant outer harbor here in the city of Buffalo. I have with me here Mr. George Hasiotis. How you doing, George?
Good, Pat. Great to be here again.
Well, we've had some interesting events happening the last few days. Before we get to that, on Wednesday you're going to be a panelist in a discussion on where the stadium should go, sponsored by the Investigative Post journalist group headed by Jim Haney. And this is going to occur at 245 Allen Street. Do you know the name of that place? Do you remember that? It's the Allen Hardware?
It's the Hardware Cafe.
Hardware Cafe.
Yes.
And that's on Allen Street at 6 p.m.
Yeah, they have a room in the back, which is a big public space where they have public events.
Right. And you need to really try to secure your seat in that discussion early, otherwise beforehand. And they do charge for a donation for the Investigative Post, which is a not-for-profit organization.
Right, it's a $10 contribution that makes you a member for a year, and they do investigative journalism, reporting of the types of events and news that the other news outlets don't have the resources or the interest in covering. They uncover a lot of malfeasance in what goes on around town, and
right.
Try to clean things up by exposing everything to the light of day.
And you've got to have an independent journalistic body working on the behalf of the people to get that type of information.
Right. I mean, they've confronted some of the public authorities in our area who refuse to give us simple information, to answers to simple questions that should be is our right to have as citizens. But these authorities and these appointed officials refuse to provide information or be forthcoming as to how they spend money, who they hire, what their competency is, and what their real plans are. And
right.
One example is the Outer Harbor, and that's one thing that the Investigative Post has started to focus on.
Right, they just did a two-part piece on how the Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation, who has basically tried to throw into the mix apartments on that land, which we've said all along you cannot do. They've tried to spring that on basically the public, and Jim Haney's group did a two-part piece on that. Am I correct?
Yes, they did, on the environmental limitations of a 400-acre brownfield, which has only limited uses that you can put on there. And I think the Buffalo news establishment up until now has missed that part of the story, even though it's been clear in the past, and there have been scientific studies done by the state and the federal government on the Outer Harbor, which basically eliminate the option of residential housing. So it's interesting that the news media doesn't carry that story, and I think this is an opportunity now with the Investigative Post to refocus on that and talk about the only real options for piece of property like that, which could be limited use, commercial or mixed use, certainly recreational, but you have to be careful because a lot of that water, sediment in the water is contaminated.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a factor. The cleanup of that area is something that should be one of the top priorities, and it has not been for years. And it seems that our appointed bodies are getting around that. We're going to definitely be there to support the investigative post on Wednesday at 6 o'clock at the Allen Street Hardware Cafe at 245 Allen Street in Buffalo. And that, if you go to the investigative post's website, you can order, or you can basically pay for your donation online, which is basically a membership of support, and you'll be able to attend that event. We need to come out in big numbers and support this stadium complex, which is the best proposal for that piece of land. Now, on the other day, the lead story, when I woke up at 5 in the morning, was the fact that the Obama administration is proposing in their new budget to eliminate the federal tax subsidy that subsidizes local and state governments and basically for owners of professional teams for the purpose of building stadiums or arenas or even renovations. And George Hasiotis, who is the partner in the private investment proposal for a brand new state-of-the-art stadium complex built on the Outer Harbor, here is with me here today to talk about this piece of legislation, how it affects Western New York and what it can or cannot do. Also, to give you the real deal on this, which is not something that our media seem to be interested in covering either, which is sad.
No, it's very interesting. This is a story that really came out in the first week of February when the administration in Washington announced their budget proposal, and it was covered by various national media outlets at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's what now, March, and suddenly in the Buffalo News it's a front page story.
Right.
Well, it's no more news today than it was back in February. But the full story is still not clear to the public based on the reporting. These are funds. Let's say it's a federal tax subsidy program that's used exclusively for new stadium development, but it's targeted towards municipalities. Let's say it's state, county, and municipal governments who can float bonds at a lower rate,
Mm-hmm.
and that difference is underwritten by the federal treasury. In the calculations and in the studies done by congressional budget analysts, they cite that, for example, a $500 million bond that were to use this federal tax subsidy program would result in a savings of about $5 million
Okay.
to the local taxpayer.
All right.
However, that would certainly be offset by increase in taxes to the federal treasury. So you're basically taking on one side and giving from the other. It's not an important factor in the financing of stadiums, but I think what it does, and you saw in the reaction by Senator Schumer,
Mm-hmm.
cited in the Buffalo News article 2 days ago, that he said he was vehemently opposed to this because it would hurt Buffalo in its consideration of building a new stadium. And I really find that not to be true. I think the reason you have politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, not supporting the president's initiative is because they like to use these opportunities for themselves to create bonding authority.
Right.
And when you have access to money, that's access to power.
Right.
So what it does is it provides an incentive, for example, for a local government or a local authority to float a bond, make it cheaper for them to float a bond, and then they control a big piece of a project.
Okay.
For example, if you're going to build $1 billion stadium and $500 million comes in through public finance bonding, you become the big player at that table.
Right.
You create patronage, you create no-show jobs, you create not competitive contracts, you create services that may not be needed but are legal. So instead of having one bond counsel, you might have 10 bond counsels. So you're not really saving money from my experience in government. What you're doing is adding a lot more money to the total cost of the project. And you're inviting politicians who are elected or appointed to make decisions about the business worthiness of a project.
Right.
And I feel that a project, if it can't stand on its own, if it can't be a successful business, shouldn't be financed by the taxpayer.
Right.
And maybe shouldn't even be built. So our approach to this is, we feel confident that a project like the Outer Stadium Harbor, which would be a $1.5 billion plus project that would take 6+ years to realize, can be profitable to the taxpayer, profitable to private investors, and that the money is there through institutional investments in the private sector to build without burdening the taxpayer in any way.
Now, how does this action affect the approach to a new stadium financing and building? Would that affect how this area approaches it in any way?
Well, I think what you see now is, and the reason, quite frankly, you and I, Pat, have been talking about this for a number of years now, and we knew what the obstacles would be. The obstacles consistently in New York State, and specifically in Western New York, are people who try to control money. They try to control private money, and they try to become the deal makers. They go from being mayors and councilmen and elected officials to being brokers. And add on to that a layer of people who have self-interest in real estate interests and properties and control of budgets, and people who control public authorities who are appointed by other elected officials. And you suddenly have an environment where it's not a market decision, it's not a business decision, it becomes a political deal. And that certainly affects the success factor, whether a stadium will really be viable, whether it really appeal to the market forces, whether it'll be done the right way, and whether Wall Street participates or not. So I think, getting back to this federal tax subsidy issue, I think that shows you that there are hidden and real costs to incentives that allow politicians to play a larger-than-life role in these deals. These become political deals, they become patronage, they become under the table, behind a hidden door, and that's why something like the investigative post is very important, because they've confronted the Erie Canal Harbor Corporation and other public authorities and other governments, and what they get is a stone wall.
Right.
The door gets shut in their face. And I think we have to work with agencies like that to expose what the problems are in Western New York. And it's a black and white issue in many ways. Whether this is a privately financed initiative or whether an elected official, whether it be a governor or a congressman or anyone else, tries to control the thing. Because you know then that they have political motivation.
Right. So the elimination of this public financing subsidy for stadiums or arenas, is in the best interest of the public?
Yeah, definitely it is. It's not a lot of money,
Right.
but it is federal tax money. And it's not going to pass. Both Democrats and Republicans are going to keep it because they're politicians and they want to be able to tap this resource. The president's saying, well, we can take it out because you don't really need it. But locally, it's very important to local politicians to be able to create little empires and fiefdoms of their own.
So this has been a way for public officials to use public financing in a negative way towards these projects.
Yes, yes. Because if these projects are going to be successful, it's not contingent upon the federal government tax subsidy playing a role. It's not big enough to do that.
All right. Let me ask you this.
But it does show the motivation when a politician jumps in and says, oh no, it's going to hurt us when we want to build a new stadium.
Right.
And you've got a private financing group that says, well, wait a minute, we don't need it. Why do you need it? Because we can raise that money and we can make a profit. The reason they need it is they need a way to keep private initiative and private financing interests out of the control of a project like this.
So tell me, what is a fair determination on whether to build a new stadium when you're looking at a project, especially like ours, as compared to some of the other stories we've heard around this area since stadium talk has come front and center? What makes a project a fair determination on why you should build it?
Well, it has to be a project which is designed financially and with a business model that is reflected in the site itself, the site and also the facility, what you're building, and what that building can accommodate in terms of economic activity. So if you're going to spend $1 billion building it, plus additional money to create the necessary infrastructure and surroundings, you need to be able to show with good expectation that it's going to be profitable, that the investment, whether it's a private investment or a taxpayer investment, is going to be paid off in a timely and profitable way. That's the ultimate criteria. The problem in translating that is that I would say most local observers and participants in this process don't understand the formula. Now, the commissioner of the NFL has, you were there in the room when the commissioner started using this new term, and it is 2 or 3 words, which is next generation stadium. And he used that to reply to a question by the Buffalo News and by a question from 1 or 2 other reporters, and one from St. Louis and one from San Diego, because they have stadium issues as well. And what he was starting to tell these reporters in reply to their questions is, well, you need a new kind of stadium that provides much more income and revenue, because it costs so much to build the right kind of facility. You're not just going to be building an NFL stadium. And the NFL itself wants to dominate the world. They want their income pie to grow. So they know that they have to be part of a facility, and they'll invest themselves in facilities which have so many other events and so many other revenue sources that contribute to that larger pie. Now, the NFL is getting involved in soccer. A lot of the NFL franchises are buying soccer franchises to run through their facilities. They're getting involved in all types of other sports and events.
So that would be the difference in your choice to renovate Ralph Wilson Stadium, or should you have made a choice to build a better, more flexible facility?
And it's much more clear than that, because the NFL refuses to participate in financing any renovation of an outdated stadium. They refused in this case, and they didn't want to sign the 10-year lease extension because they felt that it was going backwards in terms of the future of the NFL and the interests of the franchise as well as the other owners.
So most people don't.
And that's an example, again, of politicians using tax money to spin a completely different story than the people who are in the business. The people who are in the business, in this case the NFL and franchise owners, are saying, look, enough is enough. You know, you're not making any money, and we're not going to put any money into that type of proposition. If you want to go waste your money on an old facility, and we'll let you buy another few years in that place, but when it's over, you got to have a really dynamic new plan, or else that franchise is going to be looking at other options.
All right, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back here on the #1 sports show in the nation. I'm here with George Hasiotis, the partner for the building of a state-of-the-art entertainment stadium complex on the long vacant land called the Outer Harbor here in the city of Buffalo. We feel it's the best plan, and we think that sooner or later, more sooner than later, this plan needs to come into fruition. We're going to take a short break and be right back here on the #1 sports show in the nation. 837-1112 is the number if you want to join the conversation here. If you're out of town listening, it's 716-837-1112.